Imagine signing a severance agreement with your employer, back in 1990. You shake hands, you walk away, and you just move on with your life.
Right, like anyone would.
Exactly. But then, 34 years later, you go check your mailbox, and there's a letter from the federal government saying, well, basically saying, they are legally seizing your entire disability check, and they're going to keep doing it until you pay back that severance from 3 decades ago.
It sounds insane, but for thousands of veterans today, that is not some dystopian hypothetical. It's just their immediate reality.
Yeah. And this is exactly what we're tackling today. This is the Veteran Voice Weekly News Deep Dive for August 3 to 9, 2026.
And for anyone listening right now, whether you are a veteran dealing with this labyrinth yourself, or maybe a policymaker, or honestly just a curious citizen understanding how a written promise translates into actual lived reality is just crucial.
So we're looking at that frustrating gap today, the distance between what a veteran is promised on paper and what actually reaches their bank account, their career, or, their clinic.
Yeah, that gap is everywhere.
Okay, let's unpack this. I want to start with the promise of a career after service. The federal government has, for a long time, promised veterans a leg up in hiring. But on July 30, government executive reported this massive internal clash over this at the General Services Administration, the GSA.
Right, the Pete Waterman situation.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So Waterman, who is a senior technology official there, was placed on administrative leave. And this happened after he posted on LinkedIn, basically blaming veterans' preference rules for completely stalling his team's hiring efforts.
Yeah, and to really get the stakes here, you have to look at what Waterman actually does. He's the director of FedRAMP.
Which is the Federal Risk and Authorization Management Program, right?
Exactly. So his office is essentially the gatekeeper. They decide which cloud computing services are, secure enough to hold sensitive government data. It's a highly technical, absolutely critical mission. And his team was trying to hire for this new federal tech program called TechForce. The goal, and this was ambitious, was to bring on 1,000 software and data engineers by the end of March.
But they didn't even get close, did they?
Not at all. By May, they had only hired about 180 to 200 people. So Waterman publicly claimed the rules were brutally unfair. He argued that his team wasn't even allowed to look at non-veteran candidates until they had made offers to all the veterans first.
Wow. And the pushback to that post was just immediate. GSA Administrator Edward Force put out a statement declaring, quote, zero tolerance for disparaging veterans. He also pointed out that 30% of the GSA's own workforce is actually made up of veterans.
Yeah, but underneath all that controversy is this huge misunderstanding of how veterans' preference actually works mechanically.
Because it's not a quota, right?
No, it's not a quota system at all, and it definitely doesn't guarantee anyone a job. When someone applies for a competitive civil service job, candidates are evaluated and scored. Veterans' preference just gives eligible veterans an edge in that initial appointment.
Like adding points to their score.
Exactly. Sometimes it adds points to a passing score. Like, if a veteran has a service-connected disability, they might qualify for a 10-point preference, but they have to verify that through specific VA documentation, historically, the SF-15 form.
Mm-hmm.
And crucially, this preference only helps you get your foot in the door. It does not apply to internal promotions or transfers.
Right. And Jenny Mattingly from the Partnership for Public Service weighed in on this, too. She pointed out that these rules were originally written right after World War II.
Yeah, they're old.
Very old. And her argument is that they've kind of morphed into these complex procedural hurdles. But honestly, blaming the very concept of veterans' preference for a massive hiring failure, it feels really short-sighted.
It really does.
I mean, it's like blaming an outdated operating system for your computer crashing, when the real problem is that you fired your entire IT department.
That is a perfect analogy, because the underlying mechanics totally support that. Mattingly noted that the real bottleneck isn't the preference rule itself. It's the fact that federal HR departments have just been completely hollowed out by staff cuts over the years.
Right. You need actual people to process these complex applications.
Exactly. These are specialized HR professionals. When you don't have enough of them, the whole pipeline just freezes. Plus, agencies have alternative hiring authorities. They can evaluate everyone's technical skills first and then apply the preference just among the qualified candidates.
Ah, so there are workarounds.
Yes. So the failure of TechForce to hit its numbers, it really points to a systemic administrative failure rather than, just one single rule from the 1940s.
Yeah, that makes sense. So we're seeing all this modern bureaucratic red tape tying up the promise of employment. But sometimes the promises made to veterans face a much simpler, maybe more relentless hurdle: which is just time.
Which brings us to the National Desert Storm Memorial Association. They made an announcement on July 30, a national memorial honoring the Americans who served in Desert Shield and Desert Storm will finally open in Washington on October 24th of this year, 2026.
The timeline on this is just staggering to me. I mean, nearly 700,000 Americans served in that conflict. Desert Shield started in August 1990, and Desert Storm ended in February 1991. The actual fighting was incredibly brief.
You're brief.
Yet here we are, and this memorial is opening more than 35 years after the ceasefire. I mean, it took 16 years of just active, relentless lobbying, and that was spearheaded by Scott Stump, a Marine reservist who served in the infantry during the war and is now the association's president.
Yeah, and the financial and diplomatic layers of getting this done are wild. It's a $40 million project. And Kuwait is actually the largest single donor. They contributed over $25 million to this.
Wow, $25 million. That's incredible.
It is. When you think about international relations, having a foreign nation fund a monument in Washington decades after the fact, it really speaks to this profound, enduring gratitude.
Definitely. And the location is pretty prominent, too. It sits near Constitution Avenue and 23rd Street, NW.
Right, and the physical design is so intentional. So visitors enter from the left. That's an architectural nod to the famous left hook maneuver.
Oh, the armored flanking strategy.
Exactly, the strategy U.S. troops used to cut off the Iraqi forces.
Mm-hmm.
And then the center features this massive coalition shield with water channels, and there are these statues of a falcon representing Kuwait and an eagle representing the U.S.
Now, Scott Stump has said he really wants people to remember the sheer scale of that coalition, over 30 countries from 5 continents coming together. But, and I can't shake this, it's hard to look at that 35-year wait for a piece of carved stone and not see a direct parallel to the systemic delays those same Gulf War veterans faced in the medical system.
Well, absolutely. What's fascinating here is how the physical delay of the monument just perfectly mirrors the bureaucratic delay in recognizing the unseen wounds of that specific war.
Right, Gulf War syndrome.
Yeah. Gulf War veterans came home, and they started presenting with these chronic, unexplained illnesses. And for years, literally years, the system demanded proof of a direct connection that was, frankly, impossible to provide.
It was incredibly frustrating for them.
Beyond frustrating. It took decades for the VA to establish a list of presumptive illnesses for Gulf War veterans. Things like chronic fatigue syndrome, fibromyalgia, functional gastrointestinal disorders.
So today, if you served in those regions after August 2, 1990, and you've been ill for 6 months, the VA just presumes your service caused it.
Right. But securing that promise took immense, sustained fighting by the veterans themselves. And sadly, many of them didn't live to see either the medical recognition or, this new memorial.
Yeah. And while it takes decades to build a monument or change a policy, the physical buildings that are meant to actually deliver on that promise of care, they can be wiped out in an afternoon.
Yeah, that's exactly what we saw this past weekend.
Right. Over the weekend, the Mann Grandstaff VA Medical Center in Spokane, Washington, was forced to completely evacuate and close. And as of right now, there is no reopening date.
It's a huge crisis for the Pacific Northwest. The catalyst here is the Spokane Complex fire. We're talking about an aggressively moving wildfire event. It burned over 8,000 acres with zero containment over the weekend.
Zero containment? That's terrifying.
It really is. It destroyed hundreds of structures and forced the evacuation of 60,000 people. And the Mann Grandstaff Hospital, it sits just a third of a mile from the fire perimeter.
Wow, just a third of a mile. The evacuation logistics must have been a nightmare. Just after 2 p.m. on Saturday, the staff had to evacuate all 46 inpatient beds. They moved the critical patients to local civilian hospitals, while 27 patients were relocated to area shelters. And the VA staff actually stayed by their side in those shelters to continue their care.
Which is heroic. But the impact of this closure goes so far beyond just those 46 beds. This really exposes the immense fragility of these centralized healthcare systems.
Because it's not just a local clinic.
Exactly. Mann Grandstaff is the logistical nerve center for Eastern Washington, Idaho, and Montana. It handles the medical records processing, the central pharmacy distribution, specialty care referrals. It covers clinics in Coeur d'Alene, Sandpoint, all the way out to Libby, Montana.
So wait, if you're a veteran living in, say, Wenatchee, Washington, and you're just waiting for a specialized heart medication to arrive in the mail, that supply chain just got completely severed.
Right. The centralized hub processing your request is currently sitting empty in an active evacuation zone. The entire regional network basically just stutters and stops.
So what are veterans supposed to do right now?
Well, for listeners in the Pacific Northwest directly impacted by this, the VA has emergency protocols. If you need care coordination, appointment rescheduling, or you need a prescription workaround, you must call 1-800-325-7940.
Okay, 1-800-325-7940.
Yes. And most importantly, if this disruption or, just the fires themselves are triggering a mental health crisis, call 988 and press 1. That crisis line remains fully operational completely, regardless of what happens to the physical infrastructure in Spokane.
That is so important. So that number again is 1-800-325-7940 for care coordination. Now, natural disasters are these highly visible, immediate threats to veteran care, but often the most terrifying threats are completely invisible, right? They're buried deep in the physiological data of the veterans themselves.
Yes. And this brings us to a massive, really concerning study that was just published in Neurology, which is the Medical Journal of the American Academy of Neurology.
Here's where it gets really interesting.
It does. Researchers analyzed the health records of nearly 10 million veterans treated at VA hospitals between 2000 and 2024. And they were looking specifically at the rates of ALS, which is commonly known as Lou Gehrig's disease. Out of that population, they identified about 14,400 ALS diagnoses.
And for anyone who doesn't know, ALS is this devastating motor neuron disease where the brain just slowly stops communicating with the muscles. But what makes this study so groundbreaking is the breakdown of who is actually getting sick, right?
Right. The data shows these wild, completely unexplained variances between the military branches.
Okay, so break that down for us.
So if we use the Army veterans as the baseline, Air Force veterans had a 29% higher rate of ALS.
29%? That's huge.
Yeah. Coast Guard veterans were 26% higher, and Navy veterans were 15% higher. But then, and this is wild, Marine Corps veterans actually had a 22% lower rate than the Army.
Wait, really? The Marines are lower.
Yes. But the most perplexing mechanism revealed here is the divide between rank structures. Because across every single branch, male and female officers demonstrated significantly higher rates of ALS than enlisted troops. And those gaps were actually widest for men aged 61 and younger.
See, that specific finding just turns conventional assumptions totally upside down. I mean, you would naturally assume it's the enlisted troops doing the physically grueling labor, right? Handling heavy weapons, working directly with solvents and jet fuels. You'd think they would bear the brunt of environmental neurological damage. Why on earth would officers who spend more time in administrative or command roles have higher rates?
It's a huge mystery. Mark G. Weisskopf, a Harvard researcher leading this kind of analysis, points out just how little we mechanically understand about ALS triggers. We know the military environment is a broad risk factor like previous VA studies show veterans are 1.5 times more likely to develop ALS than civilians. But isolating the specific catalyst, it's incredibly difficult. With officers, researchers are theorizing about the impact of extreme chronic psychosocial stress, or, in the case of pilots, the neurological effects of high G-forces, constant vibration, severe sleep disruption.
While enlisted troops are exposed to different things like concussive blasts, heavy metals, pesticides.
Exactly. We just don't know which specific combination flips that genetic switch for ALS.
Well, the VA has acknowledged this mystery by honoring the promise of care, right? Because ALS progresses so rapidly, it usually carries a 2 to 5 year lifespan after diagnosis. The VA rule says that any veteran who served 90 continuous days in the military and develops ALS is automatically presumed to have a service-connected condition.
Yeah, they're immediately granted a 100% disability rating.
Which is crucial. However, the legislative effort to actually study these mechanisms is completely stalled. The Veterans with ALS Reporting Act, which would force a deeper investigation into these exposure risks, was sent to the House Veterans Affairs Committee back in April, and it just hasn't moved since.
And, while securing that 100% disability rating is obviously a vital lifeline for a family facing an ALS diagnosis, it introduces a deeply flawed bureaucratic paradox.
Oh, the safety net issue.
Yes, because receiving that promised VA compensation can simultaneously disqualify a veteran from the basic civilian safety net programs designed to keep them afloat.
Right. A July 28 report from the RAND Corporation dug into the mechanics of this exact trap. In fiscal year 2024, the VA paid out $163 billion in disability compensation. But the federal government has no unified philosophy on what that money actually represents.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, the disconnect happens at the agency level. So the Social Security Administration and Medicaid, they view VA disability pay as compensation for pain, suffering, and loss of quality of life. Therefore, they do not count it as income.
Which makes total sense.
Right. However, the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, SNAP, basically food stamps and Section 8 housing vouchers, view that exact same check as standard income. And the Low-Income Home Energy Assistance Program, all I heap, they count it too.
So a veteran can verify their income with Medicaid and qualify for help, and then walk into the housing authority, present the exact same financial profile, and be told they are way too wealthy to receive assistance.
Exactly. And the RAND data shows the real-world fallout of this lack of coordination. Households with a working-age disabled veteran are 10% less likely to report getting SNAP. Between 2021 and 2023, only 17% of disabled veteran households utilized food assistance, compared to 27% for non-veteran households.
And the housing statistics follow that same restrictive pattern, don't they?
They do. Disabled veterans under 62 are 3% less likely to receive housing assistance than their non-veteran peers. And for veterans over 62, that gap actually doubles.
Wow.
And RAND isolated the data to prove causation here. Veteran households that do not receive VA disability utilize public assistance at the exact same rate as civilian households.
So the utilization gap only appears when the VA money enters the equation.
Exactly. The RAND report explicitly calls on Congress to answer a fundamental policy question. Is VA disability pay meant to replace the safety net or supplement it? Because until Congress defines that, veterans are just left navigating this maze of contradictory rules, basically penalized by one agency for being compensated by another.
It's wild. And disqualifying a veteran from future assistance because they receive disability pay is a passive failure of bureaucracy. But our final story today looks at a system that actively reaches into a veteran's bank account to claw back money they were given decades ago.
Yeah, this mechanism is known as recoupment, and it blindsides most veterans.
It really does. Now, we're going to look at the legislative push to fix this, involving bills from both a Democratic and a Republican senator. And I want to be super clear to you listening right now. We are neutrally reporting on these legislative actions. We aren't endorsing either the Democratic or the Republican bill. We're simply explaining how these proposed laws would alter the financial reality for veterans on the ground.
All right, just looking at the mechanics. So under current federal statutes, specifically 10 U.S.C. 1174 and 38 U.S.C. 5304, the law mandates that a veteran cannot collect both military separation pay and VA disability compensation for the exact same period of service.
Right. And during the military drawdowns of the 1990s, the government offered separation pay to shrink the force.
Yes. Many service members took those buyouts and transitioned to civilian life. Then, decades later, as their bodies break down, they apply for and receive VA disability. But the law requires the VA to recover that original separation money.
And the aggressive nature of this recovery is what causes the crisis.
Yeah.
The VA doesn't just slightly reduce the new monthly disability check to, slowly amortize the debt. They stop the check entirely.
Completely shut it off.
Yeah. So a veteran with a 60% disability rating in 2026 expects about $1,361 a month. If they owe a $30,000 separation buyout from the 90s, they will go roughly 2 years without receiving a single dollar from the VA.
2 years. And between 2013 and 2023, the VA recovered $2.44 billion from over 112,000 veterans using this exact mechanism.
But why is there a massive spike in older veterans getting hit with these letters right now?
Well, it's actually an unintended consequence of the PES-CT Act. As thousands of veterans filed new claims for toxic exposure and burn pits, it triggered these modern automated systems to cross-check old Pentagon records. And this digital sweep uncovered decades-old separation payments that had never been flagged by the older analog systems.
Which results in cases like retired Major Raymond Thomas. He's 75 years old. He accepted a $30,000 separation payment back in 1990. 34 years later, in 2024, an algorithm flags his file, and he receives a notice that his entire disability check is being withheld.
That's devastating.
He told military.com he was suddenly facing the loss of his housing and his vehicle. He was just questioning why the system cuts off the entire lifeline instead of negotiating a survivable repayment plan.
And that's where the two bills introduced in the Senate this week come in. They approach the mechanics of a solution differently. Senator Ruben Gallego, a Democrat from Arizona, introduced the Restore Veterans Compensation Act. This legislation would end the recoupment process entirely for veterans approved for disability.
Okay, so just stops it.
Right. It also addresses military retirees by closing a tax loophole. It ensures they only repay the net amount they received after taxes rather than the gross amount, and it drops the recoupment rate to 25% of their check.
Okay, and then Senator James Risch, a Republican from Idaho, introduced a different approach with the Veterans Earned Benefits Access Act. His bill leaves the legal requirement for recoupment in place, but it caps the monthly collection at 25% of the disability check.
Yeah. The goal there is to ensure the veteran maintains at least 75% of their monthly income while the debt is repaid, which prevents that total financial ruin.
But passing either measure requires overcoming some pretty significant budgetary hurdles, right?
Definitely. When you end or cap recoupment, the federal government basically has to officially write off billions of dollars it is currently legally owed. And that's exactly why previous attempts to change this law have died in committee.
So what does this all mean? We arrive right back at the core tension we started with. Today, we've looked at a 35-year wait to carve a promise of memory into stone, a natural disaster severing the logistical lifeline of medical care in a single afternoon, a tech hiring program suffocated by hollowed-out HR departments, and an automated system clawing back billions of dollars from veterans in their 70s. The distance between a promise written into law and the reality experienced by the veteran requires just constant, exhausting vigilance.
It does.
Yeah.
And it leaves you with a really critical dynamic to watch going forward. We just discussed how the PAPTT Act, which was a monumental legislative victory meant to expand care, inadvertently triggered algorithms that devastated thousands of veterans financially by uncovering old separation pay. So as the government continues to modernize, and as these massive federal databases become increasingly integrated and efficient, it creates a double-edged sword. Will this technological leap finally close the gap, delivering promised benefits to veterans faster and more accurately? Or will these hyper-efficient systems simply become better at finding ancient bureaucratic technicalities to disqualify veterans from the help they were promised?
That is the multi-billion-dollar question underlying every policy we've discussed today. Thank you for joining us for this deep dive. Keep exploring the sources, keep analyzing the systems around you, and we will catch you next time.